Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast, and this is my review of Killzone from 2005 and Killzone 2 from 2015. Now these are also known as SPL and SPL2 A Time for Consequences, respectively. Both of these are action films from Hong Kong. Now before we look at the first Killzone film that was released in 2005, it would be helpful to understand the trends of the Hong Kong action film industry during the years prior to this film's release. So during the second half of the 1990s and the first half of the 2000s, the Hong Kong film industry experienced a large decrease in production that has continued basically up through the present day. During the 80s and early 90s, for example, Hong Kong produced hundreds of movies every single year, many of which were action films. But that dropped to approximately 60 or so by the early 2000s. That's a big decrease in production. Now, the reasons for this will be covered in one of the feature videos that I have planned for the following year here in early 2017. But for our purposes here today, the most important thing to understand, I think, is that the style of action also changed in conjunction with the decrease in production. So those famous hard-hitting martial arts flicks, old-school martial arts flicks, were kind of pushed to the side now during the turn of the century in favor of other kinds of action movies. Now, most people think that this was kind of the dark ages for Hong Kong cinema, but we did have some entertaining stuff released during that time period, and we also had the emergence of Johnny To, who, I believe is probably the greatest director, action or otherwise, in the history of Hong Kong cinema. Nevertheless, we still see a shift away from those hard-hitting martial arts flicks within the industry. And this continued for about a decade or so. And then, almost like magic, Donnie Yen stepped up to the plate and just started hitting home run after home run. Well, you might say, this is no surprise because, well, he's Donnie Yen. But not so fast, because Donnie's acting career was not in great shape during the turn of the century. So earlier on in his career, he had stuff like, the Tiger Cage films, In the Line of Duty 4, Once Upon a Time in China 2, and Iron Monkey, just to name a few. During the latter half of the 90s and early 2000s, however, he was relegated to less entertaining stuff like Ballistic Kiss, Legend of the Wolf, Moonlight Express, The Hawadu Chronicles, Black Rose Academy, and Love on the Rocks. Now, in some of these cases, he didn't even appear on screen, serving only as an action director, and some of those aren't even action movies, actually. He was staying busy, at least, but most of these films are a waste of this man's talents. He did appear briefly in Hero in 2002, but, and that was a solid film, but that's kind of an exception that proves the rule. So Donnie and the Hong Kong film industry kind of needed a home run quite badly in terms of martial arts action. And they got it with Killzone. Again, released in 2005, this is really a crime action drama that has a typical gangster storyline to it. You've got a group of cops, led by Simon Yam and Donnie Yen, who will stop at nothing to take down a vicious crime boss, played by Sammo Hung. Now, given this premise, you would expect the drama to kind of take a back seat to the action, and it would be kind of a brainless action flick. But that's not the case here. The dramatic elements in this film are actually very strong, I think. There are many reasons for this. Like good performances, flawed yet likable characters, engaging conflicts, etc. But I think the most important elements of this entire film are the villains. There are two of them. You have the crime boss and his knife-wielding hitman, played by Wu Jing, and they are outstanding. They really hold the entire film together. They create a lot of tension here. And, I think it's vitally important because the bad guys gain the upper hand on the protagonists right from the opening scene of the film. And then they just kind of squeeze the protagonists throughout the film. They squeeze them down to where their backs are against the wall. And then the good guys have so many setbacks in this movie that the entire situation, the whole thing comes down. At first it seems utterly hopeless. and then it keeps building and building, all the way to one pivotal scene where everything is on the line during this one scene. And I think that's good drama right there. And it makes for an absolutely exhilarating sequence. That scene, which I'm not going to get into too much detail on, as well as the dramatic build-up that precedes it, is what really makes Killzone a special and memorable film. But what about the action? Well, there's not as much as you might expect in this film. This is not an action-packed endeavor, so to speak. There is enough of it to be considered an action film, and it's peppered throughout. The best fights, though, are kind of backloaded to the last 20 minutes. But when these action scenes appear, they are very intense, and they are very well choreographed. Donnie Yen constructs the action design for a lot of his films. He likes to have that control. And sometimes in Hong Kong, I think the way it works is you have your regular director, and then you have, say, Donnie Yen, who is the action director, and he basically takes over the direction during the action scene. So it's not like in Hong Kong the action director just does the choreography, maybe sets a few things up. I think he basically takes over as director during the action. So you can tell that Donnie's pretty talented at not only his physicality, his martial arts ability, and his screen presence, but he knows how to film action scenes. And I think some people don't give him the credit for that he deserves. So, in this case, in Killzone, he started to get the MMA bug, and maybe he saw a bunch of fights on TV with mixed martial arts, and he wanted to incorporate that into his films, and you get a flavor of that here near the end. And I think it works. Mixed martial arts works very well with Hong Kong-style martial arts. So the highlight, obviously, being the one-on-one duel involving a police baton and a knife, which is one of the best things I've ever seen in a movie. So look out for that. You can't miss that scene. It's the best thing in the movie, I think. Now, this was directed by Wilson Yip, who, his filmography was a mixed bag before taking on this project. It seemed like once Wilson Yip teamed up with Donnie Yen, both their careers just exploded, because they get the best out of one another. It's kind of weird, because Wilson Yip, I've seen a few of his other films, some of which are good and entertaining, but just Donnie Yen just brings the best out of this guy, and vice versa, really, too. Obviously, Donnie's had a lot of good stuff in his career, but a lot of his best films, I think, are when Wilson Yip was directing. So, and fortunately, they worked on a number of films together after Killzone's release, most notably the Ip Man trilogy, which is probably Donnie's most popular films internationally. So you may as well just seek out every film that these guys collaborated on, because there's a very good chance that you're going to enjoy whatever movie they teamed up for. So I really think that Killzone, I think it was really as important to the Hong Kong action film industry as Ong Bak was to the Thai action film industry. And that's, it's definitely saying something. So I recommend this film, and it is widely available on DVD. But we're not done yet, because there's a second film here that we're going to cover, and that is, of course, Killzone 2, also known as SPL2: A Time for Consequences. Now, this, again, was released 10 years after the original in 2015. It's very different from its predecessor. Not a direct sequel, even, despite the title. Wilson Yip produced the film, but did not direct it. The direction was handled by Pao Soi Chang, who previously gave us Accident and Motorway and a bunch of other stuff. Wu Jing and Simon Yam did return for this, but they played completely different characters, which is kind of interesting. They are joined by Tony Jaa, Louis Koo, and Jin Zhang. You may recognize Jin Zhang if you saw Ip Man 3, since he was one of the pivotal characters in that film. So Killzone 2, like its predecessor, it just has a loaded cast to work with, and that's a big positive here. So what about the story? Well, an undercover cop, played by Wu Jing, infiltrates a crime syndicate, which has been kidnapping people and sending them to Thailand, where the victims are killed and have their organs sold on the black market. Now, unfortunately, this guy's cover is blown very early in the film, and he's sent to a certain prison where the warden is in league with the crime boss. Meanwhile, one of the security guards who works at the prison, played by Tony Jaa, reluctantly follows the warden's orders. So this film spends a lot of time, actually, developing the story and characters, and is mostly effective at doing so. However, I do think that this film falls a little bit short of its predecessor in terms of drama for two reasons. So first, the story is more convoluted and difficult to follow here. It does make you think a bit more, which, I always like, but, you kind of piece things together. But with a premise this simple, it seems kind of unnecessary. I think they should have streamlined things a bit. Second, there are a few contrived and highly improbable coincidences that help to drive the story forward. Now, I suppose you could, chalk it up to, like, destiny as a theme or whatever, but, I would prefer other methods to connect the characters. But with that said, I still think the story works, and it's commendable that they place so much focus on it. In terms of the acting, Wu Jing and Tony Jaa actually do a surprisingly good job here. They're not really known. They're known more for their action chops than their acting chops, but they're both good here. And Wu Jing was very good in the first Killzone too, so he's got some good acting chops sometimes. You got to put him in the right scenario though. Definitely some of the better performances of these two actors' careers. And the other actors I previously mentioned are all on their game here, so that's good. So let's move on to the action now. Now, it's very impressive, and it's plentiful enough to satisfy. There's more action in Killzone 2 than there is in its predecessor, so that has the advantage there, but, well, actually, the choreography is also fast and precise, and it's definitely the best that Tony Jaa has looked since Ong Bak 2. I thought he kind of mailed it in with Ong Bak 3, so his energy in Killzone 2 is a nice surprise, and he brings it here. He really he puts in the effort. But as I was saying, I do think that this movie suffered a little bit from the absence of Donnie in his action direction. I say this because there is a moderate use of wires used, which, Donnie, lately he's been avoiding that. He had a patch of films from like 2008 to 2013 where he was in a lot of period action films, like set in the past, ancient China. In those, there was a lot of wires used at times. But in a lot of his contemporary films from the past 10 to 15 years, he's been avoiding wires for the most part. But in this case, they do use wires moderately. Not an insane amount, but it is noticeable. Which is, it works, but I would have preferred maybe a little bit more grounded action there. And then the camera framing, at times, is a smidgen too close to the actors. With the amount of martial arts talent here, I kind of wish they would have pulled back just a little bit. Just a little bit. You don't really lose it. How in some of, Hollywood, Hollywood fist fights, there'll be tons of shaky cam and you won't know what the heck's going on. You don't get any of that here, but I still felt the camera was a little bit too close at times. I think they could, pan back and really show these guys move, but nevertheless, the action in this movie is still very satisfying. And watching Wu Jing and Tony Jaa fight within the same camera frame is friggin' awesome. This is like the martial art lovers' version of Batman v Superman. It really is. These guys are at odds for a while, but you wonder, will they ever team up against a common foe? I don't know, but I've yet to see BVS, but this one got me excited. Tony Jaa, Wu Jing. So while I do think Killzone is a slight step down from its predecessor, I still thoroughly enjoy it, and I recommend it. It actually gets its wide DVD release in the United States today, so my review is just in time. And as always, we'll see you next time.